moving swiftly on, or not so swiftly on, to our second point, and that is China-Japan tensions rise to dangerous levels. Now, both Glenn and I are great admirers of Japan, and both Glenn and I have an interest in East Asia. Glenn's wife is Chinese, and I have traveled around China back in the day, and so we have some familiarity with East Asia. Let's get through the facts first. The Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takayichi declared in Parliament that an attack on Taiwan by China's People's Liberation Army would create, and quote, a situation threatening Japan's survival, unquote. So, this is something, we have a timeline on our LinkedIn FOI page. Glenn is a senior partner there. I'm a partner, which is geopolitical risk, about the recent tensions. But the important thing is about this statement is she's made her word what Japanese diplomats, intelligence officials, and military officers have hitherto said in private. And what have they said in private? Well, perhaps Japan could intervene militarily if China invades Taiwan, exercising collective self-defense. Now, why is this important? Why is this emotional? The Japanese ruled Taiwan from 1895 to 1945, often forgotten. The Chinese view the takeover of Taiwan as the first step in Japanese imperial expansion. Okay? And they have never quite forgiven or forgotten this act. Japan came late to the party. Japan learned from the West, studied the West, and Japan decided in the 19th century it needed to industrialize, it needed to modernize, and it needed to imperialize. And the Southern expansion doctrine of 19th century Japan aimed to turn Taiwan into a showpiece model colony. And yes, of course, they did make efforts in improving the economy, some public works, industry, but there was also a cultural Japanization of the island, and that is what the Taiwanese being so proud, the Chinese being so proud resent. And then, of course, the Chinese have memories of the long Japanese occupation of the mainland as well, the rape of Nanjing, and so on and so forth. And so the Beijing communist regime has asked Japan to fully repent for its war crimes, stop playing with fire on the Taiwan question, and now we have a full-blown diplomatic crisis. China suspects Japan to remilitarize. In the latest that you can see that Japan is going to deploy missiles on an island near Taiwan. China has criticized it. Emotion in Chinese social media is running really high. There is, as we well know, massive rise in Chinese nationalism over the last few years. For a while, there was wolf warrior diplomacy as well. We've covered that in the past. And apart from rhetoric, what has happened is that China has suspended processing visas for Japanese travelers. It has warned its citizens against visiting Japan. Now note, Chinese tourism is a major source of revenue for Japanese airlines, hotels, and retail stores. Obviously, they will suffer. Japan has also warned its citizens in China about their safety as the crisis deepens. Note that Japan has a lot of investment in China. Japan has scrambled aircraft after detecting a suspected Chinese drone near its southern island of Yonaguni. This is close to Taiwan. The economic impact of all of this is significant. According to Japan's Ministry of Finance, the country's net foreign direct investment into mainland China fell by 30.6% in the first 3 quarters of 2025. This is the lowest amount since the data series began. According to a poll by the Japanese Chamber of Commerce in China, only 10% of the 8,300 firms responding said they planned to increase investments. So fundamentally, we know that the crisis is military, the crisis is diplomatic, the crisis could be military, not yet. There are only deployments and scrambling of jets, and the crisis is certainly economic. So why do we have this crisis? Well, at the heart of this crisis, at the heart of this dispute, are two contrasting worldviews. The Chinese Communist Party considers the One China policy its holy grail. It views Taiwanese declaration of independence and support for Taiwan's independence as a direct threat to China's sovereignty. Also, as people point out, it may be a cynical play for popularity because at the end of the day, the CCP is no longer communist, or maybe it is, but not in the traditional way. And so it is now become the repository of Chinese nationalism and, of course, returning of the Middle Kingdom to its former glory. And therefore, the Chinese rhetoric against Takayichi, both from the regime and in social media, has been extremely aggressive. Now, what is Japan's view of Taiwan? Japan views Taiwan as a de facto independent state. And Japan is increasingly nervous about China as an aggressive revisionist power. Tokyo views a Chinese threat to Taiwan as a risk to Japan's national security. And if the Chinese were to control Taiwan, then many of the islands Japan claims and indeed owns would be very close to Taiwan and would be threatened by the People's Liberation Army or the Navy of the People's Liberation Army. And note, and this is where Glenn and I can say that we were certainly ahead of the curve. In 2020, when a Chinese and Russian fleet circumnavigated Honshu Island, Glenn. Remember, we covered it, we analyzed it in some detail. Yeah. That was largely overlooked by most geopolitical analysts. Certainly in Washington, it never got the press it deserved. It didn't get the press in London or Paris or Berlin. And we said at the time that this is going to be a wake-up call and a shake-up, because this is like the equivalent of someone waving a gun and walking outside your front door. And of course, the Japanese have increased their defense spending. They have abandoned self-imposed restraint. Yes, of course, the yen has depreciated substantially against the dollar, meaning that the increase is not as substantive as it would have been. And demography, of course, is a constraint. So there are barriers to military development, but yet it is very clear, and we have friends such as General Hiroyuki Sugoi, the former defense attaché of Japan. You can see there's a new determination in Japan to invest in defense, to prepare against threats. And they also realize they can't rely on America anymore. So they have to beef up, for want of a better word. They have to do their push-ups. They have to do their pull-ups. They have to get their weapons. They have to prepare. And the Japanese are tired of being lectured to and tired of living in post-World War II guilt. They say, a lot of them think 80 years of saying sorry is enough. And some would say, the Chinese would say, they haven't said sorry properly enough. They still have that war shrine that is very controversial. But on the whole, the Japanese say that, look, we have been extremely well behaved for 80 years. Yes, we were wrong 80 years ago, but now it is not us, it is the Chinese who are the provocateurs. And if we don't act now, then we will be not just second fiddle, but we will have our national security and indeed our sovereignty at threat. Over to you, Glenn, your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think I'll take your palette and paint picture with slightly different colors. Not contradictory ones, but slightly different. One should always think of Chinese nationalism as a spigot that is in Beijing, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, which really means by Xi Jinping. And the Chinese regime made a pretty explicit pact or promise to the Chinese people that we will allow you to get rich and you will support the state, which means the Chinese Communist Party. Whether it be communist in substance or not is actually secondary at this point. And so the government turns up quite consciously the nationalist flame, or I'm mixing my metaphors, I suppose, when it needs to or feels it wants to exert international pressure on Japan in this instance, or rally support for the position of the Beijing government. The problem is that this spigot, I'll go back to my liquid metaphor, can be opened or closed, but the tub into which the nationalist liquid pours has no drain pipe, no emergency offlet, or whatever you call it, and it can overflow and it can become uncontrollable. So this anti-Japanese sentiment, when there have been many interviews and assessments by Chinese scholars, when you can find a Chinese official or an informed Chinese who can speak candidly, most of them will acknowledge, well, it's just the points you made, Atul. It's been 80 years, and the Japanese aren't so bad anymore, and this is all a cynical tactic that we're using, and sometimes we can't control it. So there's an element to that.
My ex Chinese girlfriend, who was at Oxford with me, loved the Japanese. She used Japanese cosmetics. She thought Japan was extraordinarily organized. Her idea of fun was going off to Japan from China. And so a lot of the Chinese, educated Chinese, love the Japanese. They think the Japanese are organized, courteous, cultured, and that is all true. And off the record, even many of the Chinese officials will say that actually the Japanese are quite impressive. And the Japanese often will say similarly nice things. They won't say that they are organized, of course. No one is as organized as the Japanese, but the Japanese have a lot of respect for Chinese entrepreneurial energy, for the speed of decision making, for the scale of change. And the relationship economically is certainly symbiotic. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, so the nationalist anger on the part of China is a tool often be used, but one that they can lose control of. And the dynamics are that the prime minister of Japan is a disciple of Shinzo Abe. And what she said and what the Chinese are in high dudgeon about right now is really no different than what Abe said and what she has said for many years. The Chinese have chosen to make an issue of this more, in part because the Japanese are realizing that they cannot rely on the United States. They are increasing their own defense capabilities and do view Chinese actions as, if not existential, dramatically significant substantive threats to the sovereignty, the wealth, independence of Japan. And that's even more than the Taiwan issue, the issues in the South China and South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. China's interpretation of its sovereignty extends right up, literally, to within several kilometers of the shores of the Philippines and all the other states in the South China Sea and East China Seas, which is 1,500 kilometers and more from the Chinese coast. The Chinese will give you all sorts of spurious or half serious explanations as to why that has some historical basis, which is all very debatable. But that's a fact.
Glenn, very quickly to support your point. Before the communists, the nationalists had an 11-dot line. The Chinese CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, reduced it to a 9-dot line. And now they've increased it to a 10-dot line. So you can see that this is not just a communist problem. This is a Chinese nationalism problem. By the way, the nationalists moved to Taiwan after they lost the Civil War. So this is really a Chinese nationalist issue. It's a very expansionist claim.
And the Chinese are denouncing Japan's militarism and blaming Japan for the comments of its prime minister and its increased defense budget, when in fact the Chinese are moving to resolve the ambiguity of the Taiwan situation, which means to absorb it. They have increased by, I think, an order of magnitude the number of overflights and launching of missiles on the eastern side, the Pacific side of Japan, or around Taiwan, etc., conducting exercises with now the largest navy in the world around Taiwan. Those are the changes to the status quo to which Japan is responding, rather than China responding to an increasingly aggressive Japan, as Beijing characterizes the case. So that's actually the dynamic.
To be fair, very quickly, to be fair, Takayichi is a nationalist. Takayichi, yes. Sanae Takayichi does want a stronger Japan, and Takayichi is more up for a bish-bash-bosh than her predecessors. She's the daughter of a policeman, motorcycle rider, or fast car driver, played in a rock band. She's a different kettle of fish to the other leaders. After all, she's the first woman prime minister of Japan.
I don't know. I think she's been a mainstream LDP politician. If Abe was different from the predecessors, and he was, then she is. That's true. Certainly, Japan is more
to the right.
Assertive.
That is also true in Japan.
Certainly, it's more in a more assertive Japan in a more dangerous environment. So anyway, that's the different coloration that I would place on it. We're going far too long. Brilliant. Fascinating as Japan is.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.